We've had some pretty dramatic energy price shocks since the invasion of Ukraine. Well, a paper for the 77th Economic Policy Panel investigates how French firms have dealt with energy price shocks in the past, and what this might mean for the optimum policies to help them adjust in the future. Philippe, welcome.
Hi, Tim.
Philippe, this time last year, a lot of governments, a lot of lobbyists on behalf of business, they were very, very concerned about what was going to happen after sanctions on Russia to the price of energy, the availability of energy. Were the pessimists proved right?
Well, in some sense, they were proved right because the prices indeed increased tremendously. So that part of the concern, I think, was right. In France, if you look at the price of gas and electricity for manufacturing firms, for gas it was multiplied by 3, for electricity by 2, and for some other countries in Europe it was even more so. But in terms of the resilience of the manufacturing sector, because this was the big concern in particular in Germany, but also in France, the concern or the pessimism was I think, misplaced. We saw that actually in most of Europe, actually manufacturing production did not decrease. There was no big fall. And in fact, even in France, with this big increase in prices, manufacturing production in 2022 increased by 2.6%. So this is, pretty good resilience.
Yeah, and the whole point of this paper is to investigate how historically firms, French firms in your case, have responded to these energy price shocks. So it occurs to me to do that, you're going to need some firm level data, some pretty detailed firm level data. How did you get hold of that? Is it available? What years?
Yeah, so we wanted to go deeper than just the macroeconomic aggregate picture and try to deep into the details of how manufacturing firms in France historically have responded to energy price shocks. So we have a data set of at the level of the firm or at the level of the plant on the period 1995-2019, so before the energy shock, but a long period where we can match both energy prices at the firm level or even at the plant level. Of course, what we know about their energy demand, both gas and electricity in particular, but also then we can match this data with lots of things that, of course, interest us to understand the channels of adjustment of firms in terms of prices, in terms of exports, production, employment, profits, energy efficiency, etc., etc.
One of the things that a lot of us found out in this latest crisis is how firms pay for their energy, and a lot of them fix their contracts. Not so many of them pay on the spot market. Some of them have price caps. Does this make it difficult for you to analyze the impact of shocks because prices don't always respond immediately?
So when we observe, what we have in the data is the average price at the firm level or at the plant level. So we don't have information on all these contracts. But the fact that there's all these different contracts means that actually for different firms, all prices don't increase at the same pace. So in a sense, that also helps us because that helps us identify the causal impact of a price increase, which is specific, which is idiosyncratic for one firm or even one plant, and then look at what happens on the different things that we talked about, production, employment, etc.
Let's have a look at some of the results. I mean, the first, a big one. Did you find that when prices rise, firms use less energy?
Yeah, the price signal works and works pretty well. In the year, what we see is that when the price of electricity goes up by 10%, basically the demand for electricity by the firm decreases by 4%. So it's an elasticity of 0.4. And for gas, it's actually even larger, around 0.9 on the whole period. However, what we also found is that during that period, if anything, the demand elasticity, so the way the firms react to prices, has fallen over time. So at the end of the period, just before the energy crisis, sadly, the reaction of firms to price shocks was a bit lesser than at the beginning of the period. One way to interpret this is that actually firms that were very inefficiency in terms of energy. Our firms have adjusted already to the increase in prices during this whole period. And so in a sense, it's more difficult to adjust once you have done all the investment or many investments to reduce your energy consumption. And the other thing that we found is that for large price increases, and this is obviously in the present situation a huge price increase, it's also true, and in some sense it's intuitive, that firms react less to a large price increase than a relatively small one. So another way to say it is that the elasticity of the price to the price is not linear, but it decreases. But it's still there, so the price signal works, even though it's less strong for large price shocks than for small price shocks.
And when these energy prices go up, the cost of production goes up for these firms. Are they passing on these price increases to customers or absorbing them?
So what we found, and in some sense it was a bit surprising, is that actually the whole of the price increase, the price of energy increase is passed through to prices of these manufacturing firms. So for example, if you have a doubling of the price of energy, and it's basically this energy cost is 10% of the total cost of the firm, price increase would be around 10%. So that's good news for the firm in the sense that they're able to pass through these energy cost shocks, and that's the reason why we find that actually the profits don't change that much. They fall a bit, and especially for energy intensive firms. But the bad part of it is that, of course, if you have this pass through, that means that in terms of inflation contagion along the supply chains, that means that actually the contagion of inflation is going to be longer and deeper, and in some sense that's exactly what we're seeing now.
You said that the profits don't change very much, but I guess they're selling less. Are they employing fewer people?
Yeah, so the price increase means that basically they lose competitiveness towards other firms or other countries. So in the present crisis, because the shock is aggregate, is European-wide, maybe this competitiveness effect was less strong than when we looked at the firm level for French firms. But indeed, the price increase has an impact on the demand for your goods, and so we do see that the production falls, and we do see that employment falls. And the effect is not tiny, in the sense that we do see that for a 10% increase in energy prices, more or less, production and employment fall by 1.5%.
Manufacturing is much more agile than it used to be a generation ago. So do we have evidence from this data that manufacturers who are suffering a price shock in one market might move their production to somewhere else? So
during the energy crisis in 2022, we had quite a few anecdotes of firms moving their production towards the US or towards other countries with lower prices of energy. We don't observe this in the data because we can't observe it. We only have the French data. However, we have two pieces of evidence that go in that direction. One is that when a French firm has several plants in France, they do relocate their production to the plant with the lower energy prices. So in some sense, if we think that what is true inside France is also true outside France, sadly, there's relocation. And the second piece of evidence is that we do see that when a plant suffers from an increase in energy prices, it's going to increase the imports of intermediate inputs. One way to interpret this is that basically these inputs, which are the most energy intensive and that the firm was producing itself, is now produced outside and bought in a different country.
When you put all these pieces of the jigsaw together, is the story then that firms over time are becoming more energy efficient?
Yeah, so that's clearly what we see at the aggregate level. Over time, French manufacturing firms have increased their energy efficiency, basically the number of euros per megawatt hour they're using. And this has come at the same time as a trend which has been an increase in the price of, for example, both electricity and gas during the whole period before the energy crisis.
There was a lot of energy expended by policymakers looking at the ways to protect consumers, but firms as well, from these price shocks in the most recent crisis. Does your investigation give us any clues into what sort of policies work, which ones work best?
So it's true that sadly there was a lot of lobbying by manufacturing in Europe to get subsidies, to get help by public money, and there was a lot of public money that was spent. What our results suggest is that the way to help firms is certainly not to subsidize them through prices. First, this is extremely expensive and potentially inefficient, because we see that actually even in face of large shocks, firms are able to adjust. So certainly it's better to help them innovate, to help them substitute in terms of energy sources, in terms of, so I'm not against subsidies, but I think that subsidies, for example, to innovation and technology would be better placed than subsidies to energy use. Another policy debate that is important in Europe today is the policy debate on the market for electricity with potential reforms. And one reform which we think is interesting is indeed, because volatility is still bad, we've seen that big increase in prices have an impact on production and employment. We should not try to eliminate the price increase of energy, which will come also with the climate crisis and should come anyway. But certainly we should try to smooth them. So long-term contracts, for example, on electricity markets would be a good thing for manufacturing. So it's not to eliminate the price shock, but certainly to smooth it over time and to give some long-term perspective on what will be the price dynamics of energy in Europe.
It's fascinating work to get this detail. Philippe, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Tim.
The paper's called The Many Channels of Firm Adjustment to Energy Shocks, Evidence from France, and the authors are Lionel Fontanier, Philippe Martin, and Gianluca Orefice. If you want to read the paper or just find out more, then follow the link on screen now.